Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Off Ramp Project. I'm Carla McLaren, and I'm going to make a case for the statement, it's not the Patri, it's the Archy. And I'm going to go back in time to make the case. When I was young, maybe 10, the first feminist movement kind of exploded. Well, it would be the second one because the first one was when women got the vote back in the 1920s, the 10s, 20s. This was the 1970s movement, which started with bra burning and the Feminine Mystique book having been written, and all kinds of awareness that women were second class citizens. And women, for instance, couldn't have a credit card unless their husband or possibly their father co-signed it for them. They weren't actual legal entities as humans. And it was a really important time for people who had been, always second in the world to say, hey, this is some screwed up stuff and we aren't doing it anymore. And burning bras was a way to say, why am I wearing a bra? They're really uncomfortable. I agree with this to this day. They're horrendous. I call them chest prison. We don't want to be in prison anymore, right? But even though, as I watched it as a young girl, and I wasn't intentionally sexually active at the time, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I remember thinking, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with, there's something wrong. It wasn't anything I could articulate. I didn't have the education. I was 10. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't have the concepts, but there was something so wrong about it. Next story. This happened later, but there was a wonderful primatologist named Sir Franz de Waal, and he worked in, I think, Georgia, studying conflict among the apes. I think he worked with bonobos and chimpanzees and possibly orangutans. I'm not sure. But he watched them fighting all the time, fighting, fighting, fighting. But he started to see something else, which is consolation. He started to see what happened after the fight or who stopped the fights as they were gearing up. And he realized that there was something called an alpha male and an alpha female. In these bands of animals, there were both. There was always a male and a female who had that alpha status or first status. And he wrote about it, and it really moved into everyday language. Except he realized later that what he was seeing was chimpanzees and bonobos. He was seeing apes in captivity. He wasn't seeing the reality of it. And he realized that his picture of an alpha male as someone who's big and brawny and gets people to do things because they're fighting and they're stronger and they're going to hurt you and there's violence, that wasn't true. He was only seeing captivity. And so he spent the rest of his career. He died a couple of years ago. He's just one of the most brilliant people. If you get any book by Franz de Waal, see any video by Franz de Waal. I'm going to link in the show notes to a video where he's talking about the alpha myth. It also moved over to wolves. Like the alpha wolf is the meanest one, the one who's most controlling, the bully. It turns out that's only in captivity, right? And in primates, in wolves, in other animals who have that kind of an ordering, it's actually the most empathic, the most connected, and the most respected wolf or chimpanzee or bonobo who becomes the alpha, because everybody knows that if they're having a beef and it's heading to a fight, that alpha is going to be someone they can trust and hold on to, and that alpha is going to be a reliable third party, so things don't always have to go to violence, right? So the way that we learned about the top of the hierarchy of animals was, as Franz de Waal tried to say through the rest of his career, I was wrong. I was wrong. We're looking at captivity. So let me go to a book I wrote called The Power of Emotions at Work. Now, in that book, I talk about accessing the vital intelligence in your workplace. And if you've been in the workplace, you know that emotions are not uh, welcome there, except for, like people in the boardroom can have all kinds of emotions, but if you're a regular worker, you can't have any. But what I was talking about in this book is how to create an emotionally well-regulated social structure, how to make the workplace less of a horror. Because in the United States, and I was primarily writing about the United States, we have the worst worker protections in the developed world. Um, the only countries that are worse than us are ones that don't even have a government. We don't have subsidized childcare. We don't have subsidized elder care. We don't have paid maternity leave. We don't have paid paternity leave. We put human resource administrators in to deal with emotional and social issues, but the human resource administrators work for the business. They don't work for us, right? So a lot of people, when I would go and do consultations in the workplace, and I say, "Where's your HR department?" And they're like, "We are not going there with this. We are not going to HR." Mm-mm. So there's nobody in the workplace taking care of the people, and there's no alpha in the way that Sir Franz de Waal understood them, which is the most empathic, the most connected, the most trustworthy. In the workplace, you are seeing um, people in captivity, right? You aren't seeing human behavior, just like Franz didn't see primate alpha behavior. He did not see wolf alpha behavior. He saw captivity behavior. Now let's go back to the early, I guess it would be called second wave feminist movement, because the first wave was when women got the vote. I was seeing women and men in captivity because, as I was talking about last season when we were looking at cults, because so much about what's happening right now is wildly cultic, even if it's not a cult, a lot of what's going on in the Republican Party is very, very cultic. And one of the things that I talked about with cults, Janja Lalich and I wrote this book, Escaping Utopia, and it's a short little book about children who got away from cults. And we go through Janja's bounded choice framework, which has 4 things, which are all cults have systems of control, systems of influence, a charismatic leader who is often extremely emotionally destabilized, and a transcendent belief system, which is we have the best belief. We have the best way to run a business. This is the best way to do yoga. This is the best way to think about alien spaceships. This is the best way to do human awareness, right? It's always the best. What that does is creates a hierarchy of human worth, meaning we're the best. We have the best business practices. We have the best way to do trauma healing work. We have the best this, best that, which means that everybody else is trash, right? Or they're at the very most, they just don't understand how the world works. Yeah. We also have a creation in most cults of enemies, right? One of the ways you can tell that a thing is leaning cultic is if they start having enemies. Anybody who doesn't believe that what we do is not just wrong, they may be evil. All right, we see that everywhere in today's MAGA and QAnon belief systems. Everybody's a devil. You have polarization. If you have the best system, then you're polarized against every other system. It's polarization. It makes you less intelligent. We're not black and white thinkers. We're all about the gray matter. If you're being asked to polarize, you need to look around and go, where are the other cultic mechanisms of control? Okay. And you have manipulation of emotions and manipulations of empathy. In my book, The Power of Emotions at Work, I talked about the known effects, research-based effects of hierarchies on human emotional and empathic functioning. And let's look at it like this. In a hierarchy of human worth in the workplace, you will have the workers. Underneath them, you might have like sort of the janitors or the people who help the workplace function. Then you have the line workers. Then you have the managers. Then you have the upper management. Then you have the board, if you have one. Then you have the owners. Then you have the central, right? So we've got a pyramidal structure. There's usually many more people at the bottom than at the top, right? Now, if you realize, because we are primates and primates do hierarchies, but if they're healthy, the top of the hierarchy is the most empathic great ape. It's the most empathic bonobo or chimpanzee or orangutan. It's the most connected, the one you can trust the most. If you're in captivity, it's the meanest often. It's the bully. It's the punk. So if we're in a hierarchy of who's better than who, then if we're at the bottom, our work is to look upward, right? We're going to look at management and then middle management, and then we're going to keep our eyes upward because that's where the power is, and that's where our money is, and that's where our ability to function in this workplace and keep our job and keep our apartment, right? It's smart to look upward. But what happens, so at the bottom, you develop hyper empathy, right? Because you have to be aware of all of the structures that are crushing you. As you go up into management, you're managing down, but you're looking up to the people who control you, right? And so as you get higher and higher, you're looking up at fewer people, right? And as you get up in the board, which is usually totally separate from the day-to-day work, you can have tremendous lack of empathy simply because you're not getting enough inputs into your emotional and empathic system to be able to function well. Like you're not a person of the people. So when you get to the very top, then this is what the research shows. At the top of hierarchical systems, even though people with narcissism or sociopathy, which is a very strong empathy delay, narcissism is too, you will find people who are narcissistic or who have narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathy at the top of hierarchies. And here's the thing, there's only about 1, maybe 2% of humans deal with those three situations, which is narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, or sociopathy. And yet they're all in the top of hierarchies. They're amassed in the military, in academia. In academia is horrendously hierarchical. I couldn't survive there. In the CEOs, right? In the 1%, in the people who are at this point running things, have had their empathy damaged by being at the top of a hierarchy. But everybody in the entire hierarchy is damaged. In a hierarchy of human worth, you will damage everyone. You will damage their empathy. You will damage their emotional functioning. You will damage their social functioning. Hierarchies are trouble. So we go back to the 70s, and I'm watching women saying, it's the patriarchy that is crushing us. Therefore, men are responsible, and we need to tear into men and separate ourselves from them and not listen to them because they haven't had our best interests at heart. They haven't, right? And I'm saying we are looking at men in a hierarchy of human worth. And there's only 2 layers, at a job, there's, the workers and the managers and the this and the that. There's 2 layers in a patriarchy, which is men are the leaders and women are the to be led. This means it's a black and white system, which means you're in extreme simple-mindedness, which means you're in a place where the brain does not like to go, which is 1 thing, 2 thing, that's all I can think of, males versus females. I'm seeing now people saying, what we need to do, because patriarchy is terrible, we need to have a matriarchy instead. I'm like, no, no, no. Did you learn your lesson? No, because a matriarchy is also an extremely simple-minded two-part hierarchy where now women are at the top and men are at the bottom. Ha ha. And what's going to happen is we're going to see an extreme lack of empathy in women because now they're at the top of a hierarchy, which has been shown to be extremely damaging to human empathy and to human emotions and to human social capacities. Yeah. It's not the patriarchs. It's not a man. It's not men. It is the incredible simple-mindedness of the system. And I think this is particularly important this week. There was a very, very badly reported story from CNN that came out about a group of men that they found who thought it was really fun to drug out the women in their lives. I mean, a lot of this was wives and girlfriends, and then sexually abuse them. Now, the CNN story, the problem that they had is it's not a good story. If you do any kind of research or journalism, it'd be like, what did you do? What people came away from is that 62 or 64 million men visited this site every month. And I was like, I heard that on I think a Saturday, and I was just kind of blown away and didn't know what to do. I finally got on and started researching it, and I found a really good person who just tore the heck out of that article. And I'll link to that person. But what it was is there was a site called Motherless, and it's just a porn and kink site. And there's all kinds of little rooms where you can go do your porny, kinky stuff, right? And then there was a room where they were linking out to this site of people who thought it was really fun to drug and abuse women in their lives. Yay, weirdo. But the 62 million was how many hits Motherless got, not how many people were going to this place to learn how to be cruel and disgusting and sexually inappropriate and, tediously failure at being a human of any gender, right? So maybe it was like a couple of thousand. I know that's too many, but it's not 62 million, right? And I keep seeing people do hot takes. 62 million men, and then everyone's getting very riled up. The way I felt on Saturday when I heard it, I was sick to my stomach. I was like, are humans even worth anything? Are we even worth anything? I swear to God. So finding this person who went and did the work that CNN should have done. Oh, what a tabloid piece of crap they put out. I was able to say, okay, there's always losers and abusers in this world, right? We have free will, and some people take their free will and just do the most horrendous things and whatever. It's not 62 million people. There were 62 hits. We don't know if they were all male. We don't even know if they were human. I have 2 websites and I get hit by bots all day long. It could just be bot hits. CNN didn't even bother to find out, right? They're just put this explosive number on there. But what I realized is, what I'm seeing is people saying, well, this is who men are. 62 million men, blah, blah, blah. And what I'm saying is, you're seeing men in captivity. You're seeing men in the incredible simple-mindedness of a 2-layer hierarchy of human worth, which is preposterous and abusive and polarizing on the very face of it. It is a horrendous system. Patriarchy is horrendous for men. When women say to me, or even men, men are not as empathic as women. I'm like, you don't know that. You don't know that until you've seen them out of the hierarchy of human worth. You can't say that. And in fact, I never say it in my books about emotions and empathy. People are always wanting me to go trash on men. I'm like, no, no, I refuse. I will not play this game. Right. When I was 10 years old, I knew it was wrong. Right. And I just had to go and get a bunch of college and figure out what was going on. But as we look at any archy, archy means to rule. There's a related word which is crassy, democracy. That means to kind of rule and govern, but archy means to rule. So a monarchy is ruled by one, by the king or the queen. A monarchy is ruled by one, mono. We also have hierarchy, a hierarchy of human worth, and hierarchy is organization in ranks or grades, right? So at the workplace, we have a bunch of ranks. And in the patriarchy, we have two. It's really tedious. It's really simple-minded. We don't like it. But there's the oligarchy. Oligarchy means rule by few, rule by the dominant class, or by a small number. Right now in the United States, we're being ruled by the 1%. We're being ruled by people who are very good at hierarchy, which means they are likely empathy delayed. Their empathy has been damaged by the social structure in which they achieved their riches, right? So because our hierarchy in the United States ends up being an oligarchy, the rule by few, it is often corrupt because we have people in leadership positions who are constitutionally less empathic than they should be because of the effects of hierarchy on empathy and emotional and social functioning, right? So hierarchy is not good. Hierarchy is not good. Now, hierarchy of things is incredibly important. I think I talked last season about the hierarchy of mathematical operations that you may have learned in school. It's called something different in the UK, but it's called PEMDAS here. So if you're given an algebraic equation, let's say it's x squared plus 3x plus y all over y to the y cubed. Okay, work it out. How do you do it, right? If you don't have PEMDAS, which is parentheses, what is it? Exponents, math, PEMDAS, division, arithmetic, no, not math, multiplication, division, arithmetic, subtraction, right? If you don't have the hierarchy of PEMDAS, you are not going to be able to do your algebra. You can't do it. There's a hierarchy of olive oil types, right? So there's just regular cold pressed olive oil, then there's virgin, then there's extra virgin. That's an important hierarchy to understand. It's not a hierarchy of human worth, though. Another hierarchy is steps to code a computer program. Computer programs tend to start with if then. So if this happens, then do this. It's like a flow chart. And then do this. And then if this happens, you have to go here and start on this flow chart. That hierarchy is super important. It's incredibly important to understand the steps of a hierarchy, the gradations of a hierarchy. But it's never appropriate to put human beings in a hierarchy of human worth. And a patriarchy is a hierarchy of human worth that is simple-minded, because there's only two people in it. And if you happen to have been fortunate enough to have been born LGBTQIA+++, and you are not playing that lady versus man game in your body, right? You're gender fluid, or you are trans, or whatever, you don't even fit in the hierarchy of human worth. And we've seen that. And it's so important to do as much as you can to include people who don't fit into the typical boring lady man place, right? Because if you are an individual, you can choose not to be in a hierarchy of human worth, no matter what anybody tries to do to you. You have agency, right? And if you are fortunate enough to be in the privileged position to be a man person or a lady person in this pathetic hierarchy of human worth of patriarchy, you can use your privilege to reach out and grab the people who aren't even mentioned in it, right? You have options in a patriarchy, but turning it into a matriarchy is not an option. Not if you understand hierarchies of human worth. You would never do one. And in my book, The Power of Emotions at Work, I'm like, if you've got a hierarchy of humans in your workplace, you need to get rid of it. Get rid of it, right? And there's even books on how to do that. The opposite of a hierarchy of human worth, it's very rigid, this hierarchy. The managers can't do the job of the people above them, and the people above them can't do the job of the people below. Like you artificially remove intelligence and function from people by throwing them into a rigid hierarchy of human worth. The way to change that is to make an egalitarian, which means equal, an equal space that is, I call a hierarchy a rigid structure, and I call an egalitarian system a fluid structure, right? So that if something goes wrong and I'm watching over the kitchen and something goes wrong, I need to make sandwiches and I need to make omelets, and I need to know how to run the cash register. It's like sort of everybody knows what's going on. Everybody has a place where they are. But if something goes wrong, you don't lose the entire thing because your structure is too rigid. Yeah. So when I talk about why is it the Patri and not the Arc? Why isn't it the Patri? Because we all know men who are absolute emotional and empathic superheroes or superheroines, let's say it. We all know women who are not very empathic and they're not very emotionally available, right? It's we have to be able to look at individuals. And when people came on to challenge the 62 million thing and they just happened to live in a male body, people were attacking them. Like, are you saying not all men? Well, Lord, I'm saying not all men. I'm saying it's not 62 million, right? It's a subset of broken ass people doing ridiculous crimes against humanity and their own souls and their own emotions and their own empathy, not only crimes against the people who they vowed to love and care for. Yeah. And that should make everybody angry, but not go to a place of this is what men are. I've met a lot of men who aren't that. And when they heard it, they were sick to their stomach. They had no idea why anybody would ever do a thing like that, right? In a patriarchy, you are going in a hierarchy of human worth, you're going to see empathic and social damage throughout the system. And like Franz de Waal, you would make the wrong conclusion about what an alpha wolf or an alpha chimp was, because you would have seen them in an artificial and in and of itself abusive system. Yeah. As we go on with the off-ramp project, I just want to drop that in here. And it just so happened that CNN article came out. Come on, you guys. Did you go to journalism school? Do you need help? Do you need a researcher? How would that be? How about an editor? How would that be? Let's do that. We don't need to jack people up with stories that are poorly told. We need to do our work and try to be as true and as clear-headed as possible. Or the next world is going to be a lot like this one. And I personally don't want it. I want to call myself out for being at the top of a hierarchy of human worth, and that's the hierarchy of middle-class whiteness. When Trump won in 2016. I was beside myself. I think a lot of people were. Do you remember that? Who's that Nate guy who was really good at predicting electoral outcomes? Um, and he didn't predict this one, and it was all a thing. And I went on Facebook just to sort of see what the people were saying. My Black friends were not surprised. My disabled friends were not surprised. And my friends who were on any kind of government subsidy, my poor friends, were not surprised that he won. They saw from their position in the hierarchy of human worth where they had to have more awareness of what's going on than a person like me in my white middle class protected bubble. They had to know more than I did. And I just looked at them and I went, I've become empathically and emotionally and socially damaged by my whiteness, by my middle classness, right? And I've got to get and be with the people again. I've got to knock myself down off of this and get with the people who know things instead of just being this pointless surprised lady, right? I was like, this is a call to action. This is a come to Jesus moment. You did not see this because you didn't need to. You were protected at the top of a hierarchy of human worth, which you hate. You hate hierarchies of human worth. Why are you here, right? So if people who are Black or disabled or poor or female or trans or gender fluid are saying, this is what's going on, what you are getting is the unfiltered story at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth, where hyper empathy, hyper emotional awareness, hyper social awareness is happening. And you may be flying above going, it all looks pretty good to me. It's not hurting me, right? These are the voices that are the most important voices. And there's a lot going on, taking away DEI. Oh, DEI. Well, you know what it means: diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what it means. And it means we're listening to the voices of the people who have been forced to the bottom of a hierarchy of human worth, because we know that hierarchies of human worth are garbage. Yeah. So as we go forward with the off-ramp project, it's not just an off-ramp from Trumpism or being a Democrat who hates all Republicans, but it's also an off-ramp from the enforced hierarchies of human worth that have made us look like cruel alphas, that Franz de Waal spent the rest of his career saying, I changed my mind. I saw better information. But you'll still see stuff about wolves where alphas are bullies, right? I'm like, hey, writer, why don't you do some research? Can you use a researcher? How about an editor, right? It's not the Patri, it's the Archy. And we're very clear about how much a patriarchal system damages women and children. But I don't think we are nearly as clear about how gruesome and brutal and violent a patriarchy is to men. They die sooner than women. They get sent to war. We just we reinstituted the draft, right? For men. If men were so awesome at the top of the patriarchy, why are they being sent to die? The patriarchy serves no one. It heals no one. And as we've seen with the Epstein class, that group of people who were involved in child rape and trafficking children across, state lines and country lines. These are men like, Trump was there, so many people in Trump's cabinet and Clinton's cabinet, and, the Prince of England, right? These are people who were at the top of their male patriarchy. They were the top of the 1% of an oligarchy, right? They had so much money. They had won in every way you could win in a patriarchy or an oligarchy or a hierarchy of human worth. And most were white. They were white, male, rich, princes and captains of industry. They had everything and it was never enough, right? There is a lie at the center of every hierarchy of human worth. And if you get involved with them, you are going to be damaged. And you can choose not to. You can choose egalitarian systems wherever you are. And if people try to do a hierarchy at you, you can say, thank you, let's try this, right? Let's try this. And maybe it's the first time that they've experienced an egalitarian system where people are people and they're considered valuable for who they are inside their heart and not what color they are or what gender they are. Hierarchies of human worth are always damaging. A patriarchy is damaging to everybody, and so would a matriarchy be. I have been in matriarchal systems, and I got to tell you, they tire me out. They make me tired. I don't want to be on the top of a hierarchy. It's bad for everybody. So if we're thinking, what can we do beside the patriarchy? It's important not to just be a knee-jerk, well, let's have a matriarchy then, like, so there. But instead, let's look at what it is and not be reactionary. What is it about a patriarchy that's so terrible? It's a hierarchy of human worth. We have so many options for a non-hierarchical system, right? For an egalitarian system, for a system of welcome instead of a system of here's two places, you can only be in one, right? To break down those rigid structures and to move more fluidly through the world. We would have to have new language. We can all say we're 10 years old now, looking at the patriarchy, knowing that it's hurting everyone, that even men at the very top of it have a hole in their soul and a hole in their being. They are damaged as much as anybody is by this dreadful system. If they weren't damaged, Jeffrey Epstein couldn't have survived. He couldn't have existed if those people at the height of every single freaking hierarchy of human worth weren't dead inside. We don't want hierarchies of human worth. It's a sign of cultic control. And as we move forward from this place, what does it look like if we stop pretending that there is a better kind of human and a worse kind of human? What does it look like if we accept what it is that people are presenting to us and what they brought into this world to share with us? We can't see it from a hierarchy of human worth. It's like I couldn't see what all of my friends who weren't white middle-class dummies, what all of my friends could see as Trumpism and this whole authoritarian rightward shift of emotional and empathic manipulation and the creation of enemies in the end and warmongering. And I don't want to be in a hierarchy of human worth because it makes you incredibly, painfully, dangerously damaged and ignorant. So let's not make another one. I'm going to say this as a matriarch in my family. I hate it. I freaking hate it. Let's not do a matriarchy, okay? Let's find something else. We need new language. We need better understanding. We need to study. We need to think about this, because just replacing one with another, nah, it's nothing. I love me some men. I love me some women. I love me some gender fluid people. And I don't like to have to choose. And I refuse. I refuse. Because if I'm seeing these people as better and these people as worth, I am damaging my own empathy. I'm damaging my own emotions. I'm damaging my own social awareness. And I refuse. I won't do it. So let's do something better. Let's take an off ramp from these ridiculous, rigid structures that don't work, that show that we are in captivity. We don't know what humans are like, just like Franz de Waal did not know what wolves and great apes were like until he saw them in nature, until he saw what was real about them. Let's be real with each other. That there ends my lecture today. Okay. Thank you. I'll see you next time.